Hey, welcome back to the channel and episode 4 of our read-along of Christopher Buehlman's Those Across the River. And for those of you just joining us, don't forget there's a Discord. It's free to join. Link is in the description. And I have a channel there dedicated to every single one of those books, and definitely, unless it gets too crowded. Right now we only have a few, but if you're discovering any of this late, feel free, join the Discord and continue the discussion. Although I welcome and appreciate comments in the video because, it helps the algorithm. It helps other people find this series of videos and hopefully discover some great books along the way. So, ladies and gentlemen, stuff is happening. We have reached the midpoint of this novel. I'm always excited to reach midpoints of novel because as a writer myself, I like to look for the landmarks, the signposts, the parts of the novel where it begins to turn, where things really start to set into motion. And I feel like this book has more or less a reactive protagonist. He's done some things, but he's also just kind of observed some things, especially in this series of chapters here. And Christopher Buehlman has decided to use an interesting technique, which I will get into once we get to the chapter. But first, we need to start with chapter 16. And as the sun dwindles behind me in this video, the hope appears to be dwindling in the town of Whitbrow. And I'm sure by the time I get finished with this, that window back there will be black because these videos tend to take a long time to record, but I'm sure it's appropriate. Forgive the jump cuts. There's a lot to cover here, specifically in chapter 17, but let us get on with it. Chapter 16. When night came down on Whitbrow, it came down hard. It came down like an army that had been waiting for the chance to sack and plunder the roost of its ancient foe. Powerful words there, powerful words. And it continues even. Sherman had found Atlanta, Troy had fallen, Rome was upon Carthage, and the moon was its general. He even asked for forgiveness because he's being a little bit melodramatic, maybe? I don't know. Let me know what you think. Is that a little bit too heavy-handed in the melodrama department? But following that is another beautiful piece of writing that I had to highlight. The moon came up, and since it was filtered by dusk, it took a color between red and pink, like the tissue of a lung or some other tender organ stretched post-mortem before a candle. Wow, that is some interesting language there. I think it's quite appropriate. I don't know if it's quite in the voice of the character. Maybe he's been poetic here and there, but regardless, I really enjoy that. I think it's setting the stage, and really that is what this chapter is. Chapter 16 is sort of the preamble of all of the crap that's going to go down very shortly here. But our protagonist, Mr. Orville Frank, that's right, Orville Frank Nichols. He is watching the moon, and there's some interesting observations here, I think, because he's talking about he's going to bed, he can't quite sleep. He's wondering in how many beds one spouse tossed or feigned sleep while another slept hard as Dora was sleeping, beautifully illuminated by the greedy moon outside our window, And he first comically thinks of the pastor, but then he remembers Paul Miller's widow and wondered how she was making out, sleeping on the edge of the valley of her husband's mass, had undoubtedly pressed into their mattress. And I think this is all great imagery. I think one thing I love so much about his writing is the imagery, right? It really, when you write like that, when you create great imagery, it really helps it sink in. I just picture this woman laying there in this bed, this old bed that they probably shared for many years, and he was a big guy, and so there's this massive pit, right, and which almost also represents an emptiness that's there now. But he's looking at his wife again. How like a sphinx. I really need to know how this manifests into whatever it's going to, or maybe not. I should have probably done a little research into the Sphinx. If you guys know anything out there about Egyptian mythology and maybe what the Sphinx means or how it relates to what we're reading here outside of the sort of anthropomorphic nature of what we're dealing with here, please let me know. I would love to hear about it. And I know one of you out there who's a big fan of historical detail, so I'm sure I will learn of it shortly. And the next scene, I heard the news the next day at the general store, Friday the 13th. A little bit on the nose for my taste, but whatever. It is what it is. A hard luck day, all right. And we find out that Falmouth's boy was killed. Something killed him. And that thing is a wolf in nature, I'm guessing. That boy is named Tyson, and there's some more interesting observations here, and I really love these because he's operating as we do, which makes him feel like a fleshed out character. They're just sort of these bullet points even. 10 years old. His head was a little too big for his body. The details came in all day from different mouths. Knowing what I know now, it's easy enough to put together. Something was after his father's pigs, but I just love these little things. And there's some stuff that Dora brings up later. She talks about his freckles. Like, she didn't know him. Frank didn't really know him much, but just they have these sort of images of him, right? And that's all they have, and they cling to it. And that's powerful, right? There's something powerful to that. At least I think so. And the final line of this very short preamble chapter. He wanted to be a big boy, so he took his father's rifle and put on his father's slippers and went out to see what it was. And he never came back. Funny how these sort of paced out that way, right? How every 5 chapters, something seems to develop. There's something that progresses. There's something that pushes the plot forward in an interesting way. And I believe that is obviously the mark of a great writer. So I think Christopher Buehlman structurally is doing a mostly fantastic job. Chapter 17, the longest chapter, very long chapter. So forgive me again, like I said, for a lot of jump cuts. I'm probably gonna have to skim some things and pause it because there's a lot to cover here. But I think the first line speaks volumes. It speaks a lot about what this chapter is. It was upon the broad but soft shoulders of Sheriff Estill Blake that the weight of the next few days most squarely fell. And indeed it does, because we know that Estill, he recounts most of this, I believe maybe all of this, to our protagonist, our narrator. And so this is where I want to talk about an interesting technique that I've realized he's done it before in the past, particularly with, I can't remember what chapter it is, but it's the chapter where we're learning about all these kids and the weird legends through the eyes of Dora, right? It's all told in third person. And that happens here, and it happens mostly seamlessly because while in this next scene we jump right into third person, there's other parts where we're quite a bit into the dialogue of Estill, and then it just sort of turns into third person, and I didn't realize it until I stopped and I was like, wow, nice work. That's some Saul Stein level of skill there, I think, because we want those transitions to be seamless, and I believe they were very seamless indeed. So what happens? Well, old Estill, he comes out and he knows what he's got to do. He's adjusting his belt under his ample belly, and old Mike, he says, dang, closed his eyes hard as if anticipating a blow. Then he got up and walked over to the hardware store, shutting the door Estill Blake had left open. There's so much subtext in this writing. I'm picking up little things here and there. The broad but soft shoulders, right? All of these are falling, all this weight is falling on Estill. Shutting the door that Estill Blake had left open, right? Good stuff, guys. And then we jump into third person when we find out that earlier that morning, Edna Falmouth had called her boy and 3 girls into the kitchen for breakfast, but only the girls had come. Usually the smell of biscuits woke Tyson up without a summons. But Tyson is missing, so they go out looking for him, but the slippers had sunk him. When the people take off their slippers, they put them together. And I think that's another interesting observation, because, you know, when you take your slippers off in the house, most likely you're putting them together at a spot, whereas clearly this was one here and one there, and the gun had all 6 rounds in it. Something had knocked the boy out of his daddy's shoes. Miles limped off where no father wants to go, in the direction he knew his son had been dragged. Another great line of the scene, and it's kind of funny, I'm not a huge fan of these short scenes, but I think it works because we're dealing with a lot of characters here. And when you're dealing with so many characters, even though we have a single POV character, Christopher Buehlman is taking liberties with that POV. Most of the time when you read first person, it's always in first person. However, here he's jumping back to third quite often to help relay the story without it being dialogue heavy, right? Because we don't have the POV character always experiencing what's going on. He's being told what happened by different characters, and it's a much cleaner way to keep it in third person. It's much cleaner for the reader, and I am learning quite a bit about that. I've never tried it myself, but I will probably utilize this technique, I'm sure, at some point in my writing when maybe first person becomes a little bit cumbersome for what I'm trying to do, if I'm ever trying to tell a story with a large cast of characters. When Estill Blake came back, it was clear that the sight of the dead boy had kicked the wind out of him, maybe for good. A locust tree had fallen over, probably in the storm last spring, and the fan of its roots overshadowed the depression in which the tree had stood anchored since before most people in town were born. So that's, again, more interesting things there, right? We have this ancient tree that has been uprooted. More subtext there, guys. This ancient evil is uprooting history, right? It cares not for anything these people hold sacred, including their children, and is proving that fact with the destruction that it is reaping upon this town. So they're thinking it might be stray dogs. They're thinking it might be some black guys, especially one of the hobos he had heard pass through town. Maybe that big one that had come to the general store. So all these guys are trying to figure out what's happening. They're throwing their hypotheses out there, and these hypotheses are very indicative of the time and place of where this novel takes place. And this is when Estill comes over to Frank's house, and he drinks with him. And this begins the long tale of what went on after that, before the funeral, the night before the funeral. Dora sensed that Estill and I wanted to talk man talk, and she left us on the porch, bringing out a bottle of bourbon for us to share. We shared it plenty, and Estill let loose. And this next scene, we begin in first person. We begin in Estill's dialogue when I called them boys from Oregon, said we had a killing, and I thought it might be someone holed up in the woods. Told them how it looked from the tracks like an animal drug him, something big like a wolf, or something like a big wolf. And Big Joe, he's the sheriff there, said they hadn't seen no wolves around here since the States War. So more callbacks to the Civil War, more callbacks to wolves. I think I get the hint, Mr. Buellman. I'm just kidding. That's why I'm hoping I'm gonna have my expectations subverted. I think I want a rug pull in this book because there's been so much wolf imagery, and again, I appreciate that sort of. He's leading you into this stuff, right? But there's quite a bit of it. So these boys from Oregon come, right? The big boys, and we all watch the cars from Oregon come around the corner as if from a great stillness. I love the tension, the atmosphere that Buellman's creating here. It's great. I think this is a great setup chapter for the darkness that's going to happen. One thing I would like to ask you guys out there, though, is do you feel that it would have been more impactful if Tyson played a more prominent role in the story? Because we didn't really know him at all, honestly. I mean, he was briefly mentioned by our narrator in the baseball game. Even Dora didn't know him. And so does that distance help us? Or does it detract from this experience? Because one might argue that if we were attached to a character, we might feel more emotionally invested, more empathetic, and this chapter might have hit us harder. I'm not sure how to feel about it. I think maybe once we get further into the book, when things start really getting crazy, maybe it'll make more sense, or maybe this was just sort of to set the stage, right? To make it seem maybe not so bad. I know a kid was killed and that's terrible, but it makes me curious of the choice of the distance here. Why didn't they choose to have another child killed, right? Or someone else who's closer to the protagonist. But this next highlight is interesting. So as they moved away on the other side of the square, finally looking less like giants, Martin Cranmer, who had ridden back from Oregon with him, walked in front of the window, just on the other side of the glass. He passed with his head down, and then he too receded off towards the woods where his home was. So what the hell is going on here? Cranmer doesn't really play much a part in this at all. And he was, again, like I said, such a great character. He was hilarious. He felt like he was driving the narrative or at least going to contribute to it to some degree. And then last week, we find him just trying to get the hell out of town. He gets up in front of the town hall. He makes this really weird out of character speech. Then he wants to get arrested because he knows shit's going to happen. I mean, at least that's what I think he was thinking. And so he dresses himself up like these pigs with these flowers around his head. And then when that's not good enough, right? When cutting down these flowers isn't good enough, he pees. And then finally that gets him at least a little bit of jail time. But here he comes back with these Morgan guys. I mean, I understand maybe they couldn't hold him long and he had nowhere else to go, but let me know what you think. Do you think Cranmer is going to play a larger role in this? Do you think it was all a ruse? Do you think it was maybe just him being a coward, being out of character? I have no idea where this is going to happen, but I really hope that with the care that Christopher Buellman puts into his writing, that wasn't just an oversight, but we shall see. So we find all these people, they're eating and drinking, they're saying things like shame and awful and the good Lord. So they're all mourning and, taken aback by all this craziness that's happened, this horrific stuff. And pardon me while I read this last paragraph, but I think it's important. I knew this face of hers, being Dora's. This was the face she wore through much of the divorce. How could things ever be right again? How could she face her students and tell them about fractions and the times tables and Abraham Lincoln when there was a little boy chewed up under a tree? Only the sheriff had seen it, and now the sheriff from Morgan and his men were looking at it. But the idea of it was planted there for all of us to keep forever. It didn't matter if the boy had been handsomely freckled or quick to smile or good at baseball or hunting squirrels. In Woodbrow's memory, his name would be henceforth married to the word murder. Not only would the boy never be a man, he would never leave the hole where the locust tree had been. Why I like this is because it's exactly what happens, right? When something tragic happens and all of these questions are rolling through our head and sort of the meaning of things changes, right? Now this boy is going to mean all that. And not only that, but there's a literal hole where this locust tree had been, which is going to be a hole in this community due to the murder of this boy. And things are getting heavy, folks. Things are getting heavy. But this last thing here, the dogs were baying behind the house like some bad engine coming to life, and the lawmen were preparing to follow the dogs. Everyone knew the dogs would pull them into the woods, and they did. The killer had come from the woods. And now we're back in first person again, back with Estill. I couldn't hardly stand them bastards from Morgan, Estill said, owlishly drunk now. But we find out later, well, when them dogs hit a scent and they didn't like it. Lester knows how to run a hound, But they took us winding all around, finally got up the trail, and then where do you think? Martin goddamn Cranmer's house. And this is where I was talking about Cranmer. He doesn't really do anything. There's no significance here. When he responds, well, you know how he stinks. I said, you think I had a visitor last night, he says. How would I know? I was in the pokey, which I had to look up. That means jail, if you didn't know. And that's pretty much it. He just questions him and slams the door in his face. But he threatens him. He says, I'd come back here and burn your damn house, meaning, if he knew anything about what was going on here. And he knew I would too. He took his ass back in his little hut and shut the door. The dogs wanted to cross the river, so we are moving on. In this next section, we learn a little bit more about Lester and how he's quite the dog lover. They're not only his companions, but they are his friends. When it says some, like his father, would have said Lester was the kind of man to spoil a dog, but Lester never saw dogs as property. They were his friends friends that liked to work and were grateful for instruction. But who do these dogs find? Who do they find? Well, the dogs went right to him. He was picking blackberries. It was a big, muscular black man with a closely shaven head. But this man doesn't say a thing, right? They think he's deaf. They start asking him questions. Why don't you talk, boy? Maybe he's deaf and dumb. Hey, are you deaf mute? If you are, say something. Well, if he is, how can you say something? I was making a joke, a funny joke. He couldn't hear my question neither if he knew he was a deaf mute. See, that's funny. And we find out that Lester Gordeau, he knew this guy. He would later say that he knew the man was no mute and no idiot either. He thought that he had seen him in town before, though maybe not since he was a little boy. When he saw the black man those 10 or 12 years ago, he thought he looked strong enough to be an old-time sailor. I'm not sure what that means, but interesting enough. And later on, he's questioned again. They know it's him, or they think it's him. They know it's him. They want to think it's him. Why did you kill that kid? But it was over. The man had no words for any of them. And the next time Estill tried to meet his gaze by moving in front of him, the man looked right through him. And this character continues that behavior throughout the entire thing, even when he has a chance to escape later on, and it really makes me wonder, what is that all about? In this next scene, we find Estill saying, it was long about 5 in the evening when we got to Cranmer's place. Second time, Estill said, but we find Cranmer here, and he's being a bit sarcastic when he says, I paid good money for this specimen. He said specimen, and it up and run away on the first chance it got, and then some more bullshit about thanks for returning my rightful property, and would we be good enough to help him? Tie it to a tree for a proper whipping, but I'd had enough. I'd grabbed hold of his greasy-ass beard and yanked him out into the yard, just meaning to shake him up. But that's not how the Morgan boys saw it. And they get in a bit of a scuffle, involving an axe and a tree stump, and Martin is fighting like crazy. And I love this expression too. They kicked him so bad the dogs was whimpering. And this is when the guy, the black guy, he's watching it like nothing, that had nothing to do with him. He could run, but he didn't. I do believe they would have kicked that man to death if I hadn't jumped in and saying, easy, easy. He ain't done it. You gonna kill him. But battered, bruised, bloodied, Martin says something strange, right? He said a funny thing then. Sing, locust. Just keep singing. Don't quite get what that means. I mean, I know we're dealing with a locust tree. We've talked about locusts like the plague of locusts. But we'll see. I'm sure there is some significance to that phrase. So they bring their captive back to the Falmouth place, and they showed him the pit under the tree, although the remains of the boy had already removed. The captive showed no interest in the tree or the pit, and the hogs, they don't like him either. They're going to hang this guy. They want to hang this guy, but they're wondering if it's the wrong man. And I remember too, Lester, he always believes in the dogs, but he still doesn't want it to happen. And this is when they talk about it. So Estill looked at Miles. You sure about it, Miles? Can't be wrong about something like this. Miles was sure. Hang these sumbitch or I'll shoot him. Estill fell sick again. Oh Lord, sweet Lord, honey and milk are under thy tongue. My love is like a goat that stands on Mount Gilead, and why did I seek this post? Poor Estill, right? He's got a lot on his shoulders, as was described by the very opening line of this chapter. A lynching, by God. I was sitting on my own porch in Georgia asking an officer of the law about what I was now sure would turn into a lynching of a black man, the one who wanted a pickle. So yes, this is the character we remembered from the general store, who went in like a normal quote-unquote white man and just ordered some things, ate a pickle, sniffed Dora, did some weird stuff, had a strange accent that could have been Caribbean, could have been something else. West Indies, I believe. But here again, when he knows he's going to be hanged, now I saw that the boys of Morgan had got them creating some rope for Miles, and he was watching all this knowing what it was, but not looking like he gave a rat's ass. What was he thinking? And, I'm thinking the same thing because we don't see any of this happen. But neither did Big Joe, the man from Morgan. He didn't know how to make a noose, so after a minute he gave up trying, and this man Alfred strung it. But Estill left. Yes, he left. He walked all the way back to town. Nobody who saw me come and stopped me to ask what happened. I locked myself in the store and cried till it felt like there was nothing left of me but peel. I know they hung that boy, and I know something went bad wrong, and they ain't never gonna tell me what, and they ain't coming back. But we do watch these men from Morgan leave. They walk with small steps, and the ones who carried shotguns carried them like yokes. Great description. The sheriff, the one they called Big Joe, croaked evening at Eudora, and he would have removed his hat if he had not already been holding it. Most of them carried their hats. The sky glowed red and orange in the west when the men started their cars. How small and pale their faces looked behind the glass. Delicacies in a gourmet butcher shop. That's an interesting description there as well. Color of pate, liver. I never saw them again, even when things got worse. And that ends chapter 17, a very long chapter, a very interesting chapter. Some stuff happens, some cool techniques of changing first person to third person there. So the only thing I didn't quite understand is, like I said, is Tyson. He wasn't really a character we knew very much, but he was the focus of this death. And maybe the distance, like I said, that was purposeful. Hopefully it was purposeful and not just the author not thinking, who cares? People want to see some death. Let me show them some death. But anyway, on to chapter 18. Dora could not stand still. She paced the bedroom in her nightgown, running her hands through her hair while I sat propped up in bed. And this is another part I was talking about earlier where all Frankie and Dora have are these extremely small, insignificant details, right? When she says, he wasn't one of mine, but I met him. Do you know him, Frankie? He played baseball with us that first weekend. He had freckles, she said simply, and then something else too low for me to hear. I asked her what. She said, I hate it here. And I love that because she's, again, clinging on to the only thing she knows of this poor boy. And she feels bad about it. She almost, with these words, the things that are unspoken, to me, communicates that she wished she would have known him more. And then in the next scene, we have our protagonist in a dream. The dream did not come until almost morning. It started in the trench. And I love this image here, right? He's pushing forward in the war. He noticed a figure caught on the wire almost exactly in the middle of no man's land, but too far out for me to tell what uniform it wore. All I could see was the whiteness of its face as it struggled to free itself. It's kind of like a animal in a trap, right? I just picture this guy propped up, just kind of wiggling, right? Kind of with futility. It's a cool image, and just it created that distance, right? Again, I love the distance of seeing something far away. He's done that a few times here, and there's something about that space, that proximity that makes things more haunting, right? Because it's just so far out of reach, but we can see it in plain sight. But we find out that he is a German. The figure stopped struggling when it saw me approach and reclined in the coils of the wire as if on a couch. And that's even more interesting, right? It pictures this guy just lounging back, right? He's kind of giving up. But there's another point here, right? When we see the French and British always said the Yanks had a talent for getting through wire, and this was how it was done when our protagonist steps through. Now I could see the face of the German. I had thought that it would be the face of the boy from the trench fight, that this would be my chance to save him. So we remember way back, he had this scuffle, a very deadly scuffle with a boy that he appeared to drown, and that memory is haunting him, and he's hoping that this is a second chance, but we know it's not. But things get weirder. I think this is the first time Dora's ever appeared in one of his dreams, so reality and his dreams are mixing when he sees Dora's face beneath the helmet, Dora's mismatched eyes. I forgot about that. She has these weird eyes, and I really wonder if that's going to play into something here, right? Like, is she one of these? Is she part of the lineage of one of these people? There's, he's pointing that out, and there has to be some significance there. Let me know of your theories in the comments, please. And he gives her a great kiss, possibly the most epic kisses of all time. The chill in the damp air receded, and it became a warm dream, all kissing. I kissed the woman on the wire and snuggled it with her, so I was trapped too, hopelessly so. But it did not matter. All that mattered was the warmth and the wetness of the kissing, the contact of our mouths, and that the war might in fact end with this kiss. Wow, epic kiss, right? A kiss that will end all wars. A little bit of melodrama, but it's a dream, right? It's a dream. It can be exaggerated. It can be a little bit out there. And of course, here we are again, how like a sphinx in her nightgown. I promise, I will look this up later. I will know what a sphinx means and hopefully decipher why he keeps calling her that in this book. But anyway, we are at Tyson Falmouth's funeral. It was well attended despite oppressive heat. Many in town had talked about going in order to show Miles and the remainder of his family that they were not alone in their loss. But that family was alone. They would always be alone, right? They lost this child. It doesn't matter. The father of a dead son, when that son had no brothers, must stand alone with his surname dying in his mind. And Again, just beautiful stuff. I love the way he's handling mourning in this book. It's so powerful, and it has all these just kind of little things that just shuttle through our minds when stuff like this happens. The mother of a dead son must stand alone, even among her sisters, with the memory of that child's birth and the wasted milk of nursing. Wow. So we're getting two perspectives here, right? We're getting the perspective of a mother and a father of a dead son, and it's pretty bleak. It's pretty bleak. And then finally, just to nail that in harder, that the flowers looked too much like the ones the pigs had worn was a truth nobody needed to speak aloud. So that was quite the very short, impactful scene there. But then later, very shortly later, in this even shorter scene, Miles Falmouth shot his pigs that night. His wife and the girls stayed with the neighbors that night and the next night too. So they are in turmoil, this family. Miles tells everybody, you can take whatever you want. Take the pigs, smoke them, make cracklings. I don't care. Just don't bring none around here. I got no more use for them some bitches. But news of the shooting of the pigs did not reach Dora and me until later, because we got up and drove away. Not for good, just for the day. We did not pack the car. They got to get away from this, right? This horror, it's too much. They're new in town. Things are getting pretty crazy. But that's about it. They go away, they eat lunch, and that ends the chapter number 18, which brings us to chapter 19, which begins with a very strange sentence. It was near the end of September that Estill Blake's shovels were stolen. But the notable thing was that they took all 5 shiny new shovels Estill had in stock at the hardware store that served as anteroom to the sheriff's office. What are they going to do? Estill wondered aloud at the general store. Build a canal? Go on a treasure hunt? Because they note that he has got all kinds of things here that would have been more valuable to steal, but they stole these shovels. So we know what's going to happen, though, guys, right? We know what's going to happen. They're digging up some bodies. When I got back home from my daily job of sitting around the general store pretending to be soaking up local color for a book I was too scared to do the real research for, I found Ursie Normal sitting on my porch next to my wife. I love that line because it feels like it's not only the character telling us, admitting his faults, but it's the author too, Christopher Buehlman, kind of letting us know, like, why hasn't this character written a book yet? Why isn't he writing anything? Well, here he is cleverly pointing it out on the page. And she is asking about that book, his love, Dora. So how are things going with that book, Professor? And he tried to gloss past the subject as largely unwritten white elephant. But Dora wasn't having any. She focused the questions on the Confederate cavalry. And what happens? Well, he decides to entertain this young girl, Ursie. I was game. I got up and took the swatter, crouching a little as if astride a charger pretending to trot. Both of them started chuckling. And then her daddy comes to go pick her up. And he's quite an interesting man. His ratios are very interesting, with his knobby knees swimming in his trousers and his white belly pushing against the buttons of his shirt. So one was open. He looked like Jack Sprat with a bun in the oven. And Ursula went to her father, dragging her oversized boots in the dust as she walked. She did not look back at us. She very consciously did not. I've noticed that a lot about these kids. They're very obedient to their parents, and their parents, they're obviously a different generation, very, very different, which we will see shortly with Sarah, the star student of Dora's. And I highlighted this next part because it just caught me off guard. I mean, we know our Frank and Dora have been screwing this entire book here and there. Not here and there, everywhere. But she says, just the same, I don't think I want to make love tonight. No, I don't think I will. I don't entirely like the way I feel just now. I'm not even 25 yet. I'm not supposed to feel old. How do you do that to us? How does every one of you manage to do that to every one of us? And after school the next day, Dora went to see Mr. Woodruff, the father of Sarah, her most promising student, and he went with her. So we know we're not going to have a chapter that's just being recounted to us in third person. Finally, Frank decided to go. And this is a beautiful description when they arrive at the porch or the house. So the porch with its puddles, the porch with its mosquitoes and mosquito hawks and moths and flying ants and still crucified on the rusting screen, and gouges in the screen where part of it hung and made a lip. Perhaps the bugs had been left to warn others. So very visual. Again, one thing I really appreciate about his writing is he creates such great imagery here, and this is not insignificant. And I did not think the chapter was going to end this way. I'm not sure how I feel about it either. I wish there would have been more of a fight. I wish there would have been something crucial, something interesting that I think Dora and Sarah's father would have shared, right? Because we know they're coming from two very, very different places, and it just seems to be more or less a normal conversation. There's some arguing that happens, but he finally concedes. He lets his daughter go to school, even though he believes that college is no place for her. But it seems to be like it's just him worried for his kids, right? Because he says that these people are killing our kids, coming right up and killing them on my own land. Now I ain't no cripple, and I ain't no woman, and I ain't no Yankee. And then he decides to look at our protagonist for that. And I ain't scared to shoot the hand off nobody coming around if I don't know him. Sarah's washed over here. Don't seem like she's so washed over to school with just you or getting there or coming back. Because, Tyson, he didn't, he unfortunately did not end up so hot. And so he's just worried for his daughter, right? And so that's really the root of things. And I wish there would have been something here that might have just convinced him, right? I mean, it did convince him, but something a little bit more powerful to turn this scene, because again, it just sort of flounders and then just kind of ends when he says, "Go on back, Sarah." And here we get the answer in chapter 20 of why the shovels were stolen. The people of Whitbrow wouldn't have to wait long to find out why Estel's shovels have been stolen. And it is a grisly scene indeed when he finds Eudora sitting under the maple tree outside the schoolhouse. And people had war faces on, everything sim-tinted. The men of Whitbrow had their sleeves rolled up and shirts tied around their faces so they could breathe while they hauled them out. The bodies, all of these bodies. And we see a repetition here. It's kind of interesting how he handles that when a lot of people are saying things rather than breaking it up into separate lines of dialogue. He just kind of intersperses it with a narrative saying Jesus and Lord, and I don't believe this. And after each man said these things, he would roll up his sleeves too and find something to put over his face, because we know all of these bodies have been found, all these rotting bodies that have been exhumed using the shovels in Estel's shop. And even Tyson was there in the schoolhouse. What little there was of him, raw and picked over, crows on him. He was not alone. Paul Miller was there too, bloated, wormy, coming out of his suit, and there were others. But they have all these people sitting here, sitting upright to their chairs behind the tables, 20 of them, some of them recent, some very old. The parts of those that would not bend had been broken off and placed beneath the chairs. Dora had seen this, and it's no wonder why she's in shock. But the most pivotal thing of this entire thing was, it was then that she saw the writing. I looked up now and saw it. It was on the front wall behind where she stood to teach. It had been written in dark, moist earth above the blackboard, like a lesson for dead class. Send the pigs. So what is the significance of these pigs? It's got to be more than food, right? It's got to be. And even old pastor here, he can't take much of it. He became ill when, in the close heat of the classroom, the arm of a woman who was buried in 1910, 25 years ago, came off in his grip as she fell. This is just the shell. I heard him mutter to himself. She has gone home to glory and left the husk behind. This is not her. It is not. She's with God and she sings. So old pastor, he's coping a little bit. He's using his religion to help him cope with the horror that he sees before him. And then after that, someone asked old man Gordo if he was going to run the dogs after ever done this. But can't. Old man Gordo said, his voice tight. Sons of bitches burned him up, roasted him right in the kennel, goddamn them to hell. Gordo sees something, right? Long hair, some skinny-ass white woman with long hair, and a bare bottom too. At least I think so. But she was gone so fast, I'm not sure. I'm going to put him in hell. So we haven't seen a woman like this yet. So this is quite interesting. This is very feral, right? A naked white woman running through the forest. Maybe the witch of the forest? I don't know. We shall see. And another great character moment or observation here too. When and then he walked off and stared at the ground with his hands on his hips. He spat and watched it all fall from his mouth. I had the curious idea that this was what he did instead of crying. I love that, right? Because maybe this man's too tough to cry and that's his own way of mourning. But everyone's had enough. Things are going to go down. We are going into them woods past the river. We are going quiet and we are going in force. If there is squatters in them woods, we're going to find where they're living and give them some. I ain't taking no badge this time neither. So no badge means business. He is not representing the law. He is representing vengeance. And that night, our protagonist had the Den Metzger dream, which is interesting because he can shake off the fear of death. He can even shake off the guilt of killing. But when I wake up from losing Dan again, I'm all hollowed out inside. I had such a dream. One of the first times Dora spent the night in my tight little bachelor's apartment in Ann Arbor. Then he wakes up with Dora shaking him. Honey, she said, but so tired herself that her eyes weren't open. I had a dream. I know, my love. You're home now. Did I shout? Yes. What did I say? You said, leave, go, let him up. And thus ends the series of 16 to 20 of Those Across the River. Let me know what you think about that, particularly about the significance of our boy Tyson not being a main character. He's a side character, but he is sort of the impetus of what drives, the catalyst, I should say, of what drives the town to action, because he suffers a very grisly fate. And all of this is compounded when whoever is across the river digs up these bodies, throws them into the schoolhouse, and the town has had enough. So things seem to be ramping up quite a bit here. So for next week, let us read chapters 21 through 25. I hear things are heating up from those on the Discord who are reading a little bit ahead, or not really ahead, but starting on the next 5. So yeah, don't forget, if you're not on the Discord, join the Discord. It's free. Check the link in the description. So thanks for hanging out with me. I know these are long ones. Hopefully they're useful to you. Hopefully you enjoy them. And I will see you next week with chapters 21 to 25.